You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, observations from the Spurs' first two preseason games without most of their point guards, and where were the Spurs mentioned in the annual GM survey? All right, welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. It's been about a week since I last recorded an episode, and as I mentioned in the last episode, I wanted the Spurs to go through two preseason games, which they have done. So let's go ahead and go through some quick observations from those two preseason games that the Spurs have participated in. Let's go back to Monday. The Spurs were at home, opening up the preseason schedule against the Guangzhou Loong-Lions. I was in attendance. It was a good time seeing a bunch of my media friends there at that game. And then on Wednesday, the Spurs were on the road at Miami to play the Miami Heat. So some of my quick takeaways from those two games. Let's first talk about the rotation of who's kind of been in the rotation for the Spurs and the competitive minutes, or I guess you would say the rotation minutes for the Spurs. So before getting into the rotations, we actually have to talk about the injuries because there's a bunch of players out right now in the preseason for San Antonio. De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, Jeremy Sochan, Kelly Olynyk, and Jordan McLaughlin are all out right now due to injury for these first two preseason games. Devin Vassell did miss the opening night preseason game against Guangzhou, but then he did play in Miami, and that was just more. Coach Mitch Johnson said it was like just kind of like a very competitive training camp, so like bruises and knickknacks, things like that. So it wasn't too major of a concern. Whereas some of the other players have specific injuries that they're dealing with for San Antonio. But regarding those players who are out right now due to injury, Coach Johnson hasn't given a timetable for any of the players as saying when they're going to return. He has just continued to say that they're ramping up day by day, and that here was his quote. He said, "Everyone else is trending, but not in," is what he said before the game against the Miami Heat. So let's talk about who has been in the rotation. So against Guangzhou on Monday, we did see that the Spurs only played their rotation players for the first half only. Then they didn't come out in the second half. Other players took over those minutes. Then against Miami, they played a little bit more. The rotation players, they played about 3.5 quarters. So the players who have been those rotation players I keep mentioning are, of course, Victor Wembanyama, Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, Julian Champagnie, and Luke Kornet, and also Devin Vassell specifically in that Heat game. Now, before bringing in the reserves to finish out the game in the second half on Monday, and then the second half of the third quarter, and then the fourth quarter on Wednesday, Coach Johnson has been giving three other players some minutes, and that's Adam Flagler, who's been getting the backup point guard minutes with all the other point guards out right now due to injury. Lindy Waters III, who the Spurs signed as a free agent, he's been getting some wing minutes. He started the first night without Vassell, but then the second night he came off the bench. And then rookie Carter Bryant has been getting a lot of minutes as well as either some backup small forward or even playing some power forward minutes as well off the bench. And these players do continue to play though into the fourth quarter once all the other rotation players have been pulled. So that's kind of been the rotation for the Spurs through at least two preseason games as we await to see what some of their other rotation players do rejoin the team after healing from their injuries. One trend we've seen right now that shouldn't take place during the regular season is that because all the point guards are literally out, except for Adam Flagler and David Jones-Garcia, who's more so like a combo guard, the Spurs really don't have a point guard out there right now, to start the game. So the starters, it's been a lot of wing players plus Harrison Barnes and Wemby in the first two games. And so basically all the starters have been having to run point guard by committee, where you see different players kind of bringing the ball up the floor as soon as the other team scores, or if they get a rebound, they just kind of push the ball up the floor. So basically everyone's had to kind of initiate the offense at different times, which means that we've seen a lot of point Wemby right now early in the offense, where Victor's bringing the ball up and setting up teammates. He's been able to run some pick and roll, been able to kind of drive in and kind of draw on the defense and kick out to shooters. We've also seen the Spurs kind of go to a very early 4 down kind of post offense right now with without having a point guard out there, where Wemby gets his position, the other players kind of move the ball around, they get him his spot in the post, and he either operates and goes one-on-one against his defender, or if he draws in a second defender, then he kicks out and then that ball continues to move. And so again, it's been a lot of point guard by committee, and even there are times when it looks like where the players do struggle out there. The offense doesn't look as smooth because they literally don't have a point guard out there at times, and that's something Coach Johnson mentioned after the Heat game, where he said that the team hasn't even used some of these lineups in training camp yet that they're actually having to put out on the floor right now because they're without all of their lead ball handlers at the moment. Another observation I made was the Wemby Kornet lineup. Those two players got to play the same lineup together on Monday against Guangzhou. So we did get to see Wemby and Kornet out on the floor for a few minutes. Kornet specifically been Wemby's backup, but then there was a time where Coach Johnson brought both players out on the floor. And so against Guangzhou on Monday, it was very effective, that lineup where you saw Wemby being the pick and roll ball handler and Kornet being the player who kind of sets the pick and then kind of rolls. And Victor, of course, can kind of scan the floor, and he was able to find Kornet down there for multiple possessions where Kornet's able to score pretty easily against the Guangzhou Loong-Lions. Then on Wednesday, the Miami Heat play a little bit differently in the front court, where they only have Bam Adebayo playing center or Kel'el Ware playing center. So the Spurs decided to kind of just match big for big, and they never actually went with the two players, Wemby and Kornet, out there. But again, at least against Guangzhou on that Monday, that lineup looked very good with both Victor and Luke out there. And I think that's something we're going to see this season at different times against certain matchups, as I mentioned before, because we have seen some footage of the Spurs practicing with those two players on the floor. And then, of course, we saw that lineup out on Monday. So now, again, it's only been two preseason games, so I'm not going to go too detailed into stats, especially like shooting stats. I'm not going to look at because these, all these stats are basically pointless because they don't start until the regular season starts. So I'm just going to kind of use them more so like as a baseline to kind of just kind of give an observation where the players are at. So I'm going to go through a lightning round on a few players, mainly players from the rotation, but also some players who have stood out early on who likely won't be in the rotation. So of course, let's start with Victor. He's averaging 9.5 points through 2 games, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 5.5 turnovers, 2.5 blocks in 19 minutes. So right now, what we do see right now is the key number there is those 6 assists and 5.5 turnovers. Again, right now, without any point guards out on the floor, he's having to do a lot more creation, for the Spurs' offense, where he's either driving inside and drawing in the defense and kicking out, getting the ball in the post, setting screens or running pick and roll himself, and kind of finding his teammates. So we do see more so of his creativity, but that comes at a cost at times when maybe he and some of his teammates are on the same page, or maybe his passes are just a little off. But again, he's having to do a lot more ball handling and creating than I think he's going to have to do when he has Fox there, when he has Castle there, when he has Dylan Harper on the floor with him. So that's partly why we're seeing a lot more of Victor kind of creating right now for his teammates, and maybe why his shot attempts aren't up there, what we're used to. And also specifically, one thing that's been noted on social media is his 3-point attempts, where he's only taken 1 3 per game. But part of that, again, if you watch the tape, it's that he's just driving immediately. He's seeing those open lanes and then finding his teammates and looking for those good to great passes, where he could take a contested shot himself, or he can move it on to one of his teammates. As far as defensively, of course, Wemby is a phenomenal defender. We've seen some of those moments already where he's coming out of nowhere and just swatting shots. He had a nice block against Frank Kaminsky, where Kaminsky tried to go reverse layup under the glass against him, but Victor still swatted it. He also had a block off the glass when Andrew Wiggins trying to get by him for a layup attempt, swatting that shot off the glass and then igniting the break. So like I mentioned, so that's kind of some initial observations on Wemby. One thing I do want to say though is that you definitely see that for Victor to have missed since February when he was diagnosed with that blood clot issue, he's definitely not letting that hamper him in his return here, where he's been cleared obviously by the doctors, but we also see that he's giving forth a lot of his effort, and sometimes it's a little concerning because he's diving on the ball he's diving on the floor for loose balls at times, and he's kicking out to teammates and things like that. So yeah, he's going all out there, and so he's not letting what happened to him in February stop, make him play a little bit more cautious. He's going out there and giving it, giving his best effort. And so that's something good to see is that Wemby is healthy, out there in the minutes that he's out there right now. Let's move on to Keldon Johnson. So he's averaging 17.5 points and 4 rebounds in 21 minutes in these 2 preseason games. So he has started in both games, which will be a question for the regular season. Is he's likely still going to come off the bench. Right now, all the wings are out for the Spurs, and so Keldon's done a great job in these first 2 games of really making the most of his drives when he goes inside. He's very deliberate about when he attacks. He's physical when he gets inside. Pushing away players with his body, and then finishing well, or if not, drawing contact and getting to the free throw line. And so that's just my question. Is whenever the season begins, if he's coming off the bench, can he maintain this very deliberate focused kind of attack here and staying efficient on his drives? And that's kind of one of the early season questions I have for him whenever the regular season starts. And like I said, he's looked good here in his first 2 games, preseason games, should we say. Let's move on to Julian Champagnie. He's averaging 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals in 20 minutes in 2 preseason games. Of course, he's a lights out shooter right now from outside. He has started both games. Again, he's likely also going to come off the bench for the Spurs whenever the regular season begins. He had a very interesting comment on Wednesday after Miami Heat game, where he mentioned KYP, which means know your personnel, because he was asked about just how he's able to get those shots and kind of get those nice looks from three, and he talked about how he's got some familiarity with some of the players now playing with the Spurs for a few seasons, so he knows kind of where to be when Victor has the ball. He knows where to be when Devin Vassell has the ball, when Keldon Johnson has the ball, and of course he has a little bit of experience with De'Aaron Fox that will have to continue to build, because he and Fox didn't get to play that long last season. Also, he has a lot of chemistry with Stephon Castle. They shared the floor a lot together last year, but he will have to create that chemistry with Dylan Harper. So basically, what Champagnie mentioned was just about know your personnel in terms of each player that's going to draw on the defense with their drives and their ability to kind of get inside. He said he likes to play closer to the ball when those players have the ball in their hands, because he makes the defense make a choice of basically pick your poison. Either his man stays on Julian so that he can take away Julian's three, but then that allows someone like Wemby or Fox to kind of beat that defender one-on-one and get to the rim or get a better look. Or his defender will help and try to go inside and help, on Victor, on Fox, on Castle, etc., which is going to give Julian a wide open three. And of course, he's ready to shoot those wide open threes. And so that's kind of what he's talked about, is how it's a lot about getting his shots, getting those good shots from three, is more so about kind of knowing your personnel and knowing where to find the best place in the offense, depending on who's kind of initiating the action out there on the Spurs. And then one thing I want to note is that we do see that Champagnie's likely going to be in the rotation based on the sub patterns so far through these first two preseason games. Let's move on to Luke Kornet, the big man the Spurs signed in the offseason from the Boston Celtics. He's averaging 12.5 points, 7.5 rebounds in 14.6 minutes, so far through two preseason games. He has been the backup center to Wemby, but like I mentioned, we did see he and Victor play together in that first game against Guangzhou. Against Guangzhou, they had no answers for him in the paint, whether it was Victor feeding him or other players kind of getting inside and feeding him inside. He's just very patient. He has a soft touch around the rim, kind of doesn't go up too quickly or force something up there. Against Miami, he also had a possession where he got a point guard or a smaller guard, caught on him in a mismatch in the post, and he kind of just had a nice little hook against that player. In the second game against Miami, we did see more so his ability to crash the offensive glass was something I wrote about over the summer, where he was able to secure 7 offensive rebounds in that game for 11 total rebounds. And with those offensive rebounds, he either creates extra possessions, new shots for his teammates, or he himself kind of tips in those misses from his teammates and kind of gets some of his points that way as well. And so again, that's something that I had noted that he did at least with the Boston Celtics, and now we're kind of seeing that element of his game in that first game against Miami. On defense against the Heat, we did see him get a help block, and then also he batted away a alley-oop attempt. So again, Kornet has looked good so far through 2 games, and he's going to be Victor's backup, but then they are also going to share the floor at times. All right, Devin Vassell, 12 points, 6 rebounds in 23 minutes versus Miami. Again, only Miami is the game that he played against, or the team that he played against. So in that second quarter, he kind of found his mid-range opportunities. He did take 4 threes, but again, a lot of those were not set up very well in the offense, and so they were kind of contested very well and kind of rushed toward the end of the shot clock. He had a nice steal in the open court and dunked it on the other end. He also showed some full court pressure when Jaime Jaquez Jr. was trying to bring the ball up in the third quarter. Again, it's just one game so far for Vassell, and his I guess you would say like his shot selection or his responsibility right now is a little bit more than he's going to have whenever Wemby, Fox, and Castle were all on the floor with him. So again, that's kind of the question is, how does he play whenever all those other players are around him in a game? Carter Bryant, the rookie, is averaging 11.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1 steal, 1.5 assists, 2 turnovers in 21 minutes so far through 2 preseason games. One thing we want to note is that, yes, he has been in the 9-man rotation in all 4 quarters of the game, but then we also see that, he's closing out the game with the reserve players toward the end. So I noted in that first game against Guangzhou, he did a pretty good job of finding his spots in the dunker spot, kind of just cutting, being an outlet for players to kind of drive in and dish to, and then he got some nice layups and dunks that way. In that second game against Miami, we saw that where he kind of pump fakes from 3 and then kind of drives in. In the fourth quarter, he got 2 mid-rangers to go in, and then he also made some free throws late. You could tell, though, he's kind of still kind of figuring out on offense, which is expected as a young player, out there. And then also on defense, again, he shows some athletic plays at times. He had a nice play against Guangzhou where he kind of just goes straight up. He didn't get the block, but he at least, got his body in the air against the player. But also he's kind of like I guess like exerting himself, kind of like going like 100 miles an hour. And that's kind of the thing is he just has to slow down a little bit, which is understandable as a rookie kind of playing in his first NBA games. Again, right now he's likely not in the opening night rotation, but at least it's a good sign that he's at least getting minutes right now with all these players that are currently out for the Spurs. Next player I want to mention is Adam Flagler, the player who's on a training camp contract. So he's averaging 10.5 points, 4 assists, 1 turnover, 1.5 steals in 22 minutes right now in the preseason. So Flagler's in a situation that he probably didn't expect, where all the point guards are literally out, where, Fox, Harper, Castle, even Jordan McLaughlin, who would have likely been playing these backup minutes, is out right now due to an injury. So he's at least making the most of his backup point guard minutes right now, is Adam Flagler. He's doing a good job of spacing the floor out there for the team, being ready to hit threes off ball. Against Miami, he got a steal and then a layup in the open court. He also had a nice play with Victor where he and Wemby ran a pick and roll together. Flagler drew in 2 defenders, threw the ball up in the air. Wemby catches it and dunks it with 2 hands for an alley-oop play. And so, again, it's still going to be a challenge for Flagler to make this roster because, for one, there's no standard roster spots right now on the team. They're completely filled with Bismack Biyombo and Lindy Waters getting those last 2 spots. Plus, all these point guards that are out there, these aren't severe injuries. They're gonna come back soon at some point. So again, he's not always gonna have this opportunity. So again, the challenge is still very difficult for Flagler to make the team. But I will say, if he ends up getting waived and then ends up signing with Austin in the G League, at least he's a player the Spurs have as an option to kind of sign for the future, whether they need him later on this season or if they want to look at him for a future spot for next season. So again, Flagler's had a pretty good preseason so far through 2 games. And then, of course, one of the free agent signings this past summer, Lindy Waters III, averaging 9 points off the bench, and he started in the first game. So he's basically an outside shooter, knows, kind of like Champagnie, knows how to play well off others, can kind of be a utility player out there, just a vet, kind of knows his role out there, his play with good teams like OKC, Golden State, and Detroit. Probably not in the rotation either when the full roster is healthy, but again, he's an option that the coaching staff can go to either add another shooter out there on the wing, or if one of the players later on in the season is in a shooting slump, maybe someone like Keldon Johnson or Julian Champagnie, Devin Vassell. Waters is a player that the coaching staff can go to insert into a select game to bring some minutes. So again, those are just some quick lightning round observations through. Again, it's only been 2 games on the players that have been out there on the floor so far through these first 2 preseason games. All right, let's move on to our second topic, and that is the annual GM survey from NBA.com. John Schumann puts this together each year, and so he released it on Thursday, this latest one. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the Spurs were mentioned a lot in here. I'm not going to go through every single category they were mentioned, but I just want to highlight a few of them. Actually, not even a few. It's actually a lot. Anyway, let's just go through it. So for MVP, so GMs, we're asked these questions, and so Wemby comes in 4th amongst GMs as a likely MVP. The overwhelming favorite is Nikola Jovic of the Denver Nuggets. And then followed by Luka Doncic of the Lakers and SGA of the Oklahoma City Thunder. So again, Wemby, is likely to come in 4th according to these GMs, which matches what Vegas has been seeing as well, is what some of the odds have shown, as I've discussed before, is that Wemby's likely going to be 4th in MVP voting. If you were starting a franchise today, all GMs would want Wemby, or 83% of them. So he's the overwhelming favorite here. So he's first to begin your team with or start your franchise. He's got 83% of the vote here at first. That has actually increased from last season, where he was at 77% as first to begin your franchise. Who's likely to have a breakout season? Wemby is tied for 2nd in this voting with 10% of the vote. Amen Thompson is first of the Houston Rockets at 30%. And also notable is that Stephon Castle, heading into his 2nd year, got some votes from the GMs for this category of who's going to have a breakout season. Who is the best center? Wemby came in 2nd here in the voting with 3% of the vote. Again, the overwhelming favorite here was Nikola Jovic, who got 97% of the vote. And again, Jokic is expected to be the MVP according to these GMs. Here's one of the questions. What was the most underrated player acquisition move? Luke Kornet joining the Spurs via free agency was tied for 4th with 7% of the vote. And then the favorite, I wouldn't say overwhelming, it was only 17% of the vote, was the Orlando Magic trading for Desmond Bane this offseason. So again, GMs see that Kornet joining the Spurs was a notable acquisition. And of course, through these first 2 preseason games, we have seen that already. Who's likely to be the most improved team? The Spurs come in at 2nd here, tied for 2nd with 20% of the vote. The favorite was the Orlando Magic at first with 47% of the vote. So again, the Spurs GMs are expecting to make a leap this year in terms of improving their team. Let's see here. Next category was who's the rookie who will be the best player in 5 years from now. So Cooper Flagg is the overwhelming favorite of the Dallas Mavericks' #1 pick at 93% of the vote, but Dylan Harper did get some votes in this category. Next up, it was, who is the steal of the draft? So now Carter Bryant's name comes up here. So Carter Bryant was tied for second in this voting with 10% of the vote. And Kasparas Jakubonis, who the Spurs just played, who's on Miami, got first, but at just 17% of the vote. So again, Carter Bryant was a player that a lot of GMs see as a steal in that draft. This one's an easy one. Who is the best defensive player in the league? It's Wemby, of course, first at 80% of the vote, and he has made a drastic improvement from last year. So last year, Wemby was first as well in this category, but only 40% of the vote. Now, I mean, he's just far and above everybody else here with 80% of the vote. If Wemby's the best defender, well, then he's obviously the best interior defender as well. So that's where GM said 80% of the vote as well for Wemby here. Who's the most versatile defender according to GMs? Wemby's tied for fourth here with 10% of the vote. Amen Thompson came in at first with just 18% of the vote. So again, there's kind of, the votes are going around there for that one is who's the most versatile defender. Who's the best assistant coach? Sean Sweeney got some votes, the new Spurs assistant coach or associate head coach, should I say. Micah Nori of the Minnesota Timberwolves was first at 25% of the vote, but again, it's notable that one of the Spurs' new assistant coaches is regarded as one of the best assistant coaches coming up here. Who has the most promising young core of the future? The Spurs came in at second with 27% of the vote because the Oklahoma City Thunder, who just won a championship with their roster of young players, it came in at first at 50% of the vote. But again, it's good to see that the Spurs are right there with Victor, with Dylan Harper, with Stephon Castle. Carter Bryant is part of their future here. Who's the most athletic player? Wemby got some votes here, but the favorite was Amen Thompson of the Rockets at 58% of the vote. Who is the fastest player with the ball in his hands? And that is De'Aaron Fox, according to GMs, first at 53% of the vote. And even he's actually, despite Fox getting older, he's actually made an improvement here because last year GMs had him at first, but with 52% of the vote. So he made a 1% increase in GMs voting for him for being the fastest player with the ball in his hands. And Fox has also talked about his speed at Media Day. And then lastly, who's the most versatile player? Wemby and Giannis both tied for first here with 30% of the vote each. So again, those are just some takeaways from the, or I guess just going over the results of the reviewing the annual GM survey done by NBA.com. Let's keep going. All right, for our next topic, let's just go through news and notes before we close out this episode. So I do want to note that I'm recording this on Thursday, October 9th, this episode in the evening. So that means that Jeremy Sochan and the Spurs have only 11 days if both sides want to get a contract extension done. That is the time that they have left. They only have 11 days left, which the deadline is October 20th. If both sides are interested in getting a deal, a contract extension in place. I do want to mention that Nikola Jovic, who the Spurs just saw on Wednesday in Miami, did recently get a rookie contract extension. And so I am eager to see if maybe his deal is one that maybe Sochan and the Spurs are looking at, where Jovic, I'll kind of go into the details here. So he got a 4-year deal for $62.4 million. And this deal, when we look at percentage of the cap, it kind of decreases year by year. So year one is at $16.2 million, which is 10% of the cap. Then year two goes down to $14.9 million, which is 9% of the cap. Year three, $15 million, which is 8%. And then year four has a little bit of a bump, $16.2 million, but it's still just 8% of the cap. So again, I do wonder if maybe Spurs and Sochan's camp are looking at that maybe as a possible kind of outline of a deal, or if maybe that's not enough for Sochan's side. Again, when I wrote about this upcoming contract extension for Sochan, I did mention that I thought maybe a deal like the non-tax MLE could work. So that would have been a little bit more than what Jovic got. So it would be $67.4 million for 4 years, or kind of a middle ground pitch was way higher, which was like $73.9 million for 4 years. But I'm interested to see maybe that Jovic deal somewhere as a starting point now for both sides if they want to get a contract extension done. Like I said, there's only 11 days to figure out if they do get a contract extension done. So we'll kind of see what happens there between Jeremy Sochan and the Spurs going forward. So this wraps up this episode. Thanks for checking in. As I mentioned last week, now that the regular season is upon us, or it's not here technically, but it's coming soon. So I will be having weekly episodes as usual, like I usually do during the season. So I am aiming for my next episode to come in sometime after Monday, October 13th, because by that point the Spurs will have played Friday's game against the Utah Jazz in the preseason, and then they'll play their first game against the Indiana Pacers on Monday, October 13th. So sometime before that next Pacers game, the second Pacers game next week, I'll have another episode. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.